My name is Lily, and I am 28 years old. For the last 10 years, my life has been a whirlwind of scorching heat, razor-sharp knives, and the relentless pressure of a professional kitchen. It's a world I chose, a world I love. But last Saturday, at my brother's celebratory dinner at the city's most exclusive restaurant, my parents told me to eat alone on the outside terrace. Like a stray, they were embarrassed to let inside. They thought they were putting me in my place, a final, public declaration of my status as the family disappointment. What they didn't know was that the restaurant's world-famous head chef was my mentor, my friend, and my greatest champion. And he was about to serve them a lesson in humility they would never forget. If you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. This story is for you. And before I get into the delicious details of how this disastrous night turned into my greatest triumph, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about reclaiming your worth when the people closest to you try to take it away. To understand that night, you have to understand the landscape of my family. We were a classic portrait of suburban ambition, painted in shades of my parents' expectations. My father, Richard, was a corporate attorney who measured success in billable hours and the brand of his watch. My mother, Margaret, was a real estate agent who saw our family as her most important listing, one that needed to project an image of flawless success at all times. And at the center of that portrait, gleaming under a perpetual spotlight, was my older brother, David. David was the golden child, the embodiment of every dream my parents had for their children. He was 4 years older, effortlessly charming, and had followed the path they'd paved for him without deviation. He went to an Ivy League school, got a job in finance, and by 32, was already a vice president at a prestigious investment firm. He was their masterpiece, and they never missed an opportunity to display him. And then there was me. I was the rough draft they'd shoved in a drawer. From a young age, it was clear I didn't fit their mold. While David was acing his SATs, I was spending hours in the kitchen with my grandmother, Maria. She was the one who taught me that food was more than sustenance. It was a language. She showed me how the simplest ingredients, flour, water, salt, yeast, could be transformed into something that brought people together, that created joy. Her kitchen was my sanctuary, a place where my creativity wasn't just tolerated, it was celebrated. When she passed away when I was 16, she left me her collection of handwritten recipe books, a legacy I treasured more than any inheritance. My parents saw my passion for cooking as a quaint hobby, something I would surely outgrow. When I announced I wanted to go to culinary school instead of law school, you would have thought I had told them I was joining the circus. A chef? My mother had said, her voice dripping with a disappointment that was almost tangible. Lily, that's service work. People like us don't serve. We get served. My father was more direct. It's a waste of your potential, he declared. We didn't raise you to work in a hot, sweaty kitchen for minimum wage. They refused to pay for culinary school, hoping it would deter me. It didn't. I worked 2 jobs through my senior year of high school, saved every penny, applied for every scholarship I could find, and paid my own way. The day I was accepted into one of the country's top culinary programs was one of the proudest moments of my life. I called my parents, ecstatic, and my mother's only response was a sigh, followed by, "Well, I hope you know what you're doing." That set the tone for the next decade. Every achievement of mine was met with lukewarm acknowledgement, while every minor success of David's was celebrated with fanfare. When I graduated with honors from culinary school, they missed the ceremony. David, they explained, had a critical networking event that same weekend which, I later found out, was a company golf tournament. When I landed my first job as a line cook at a respected bistro, my father's comment was, "So, you're chopping vegetables?" The same week, David got a small promotion, and my parents threw a dinner party for him. Over the years, I worked my way up, pouring my heart and soul into my craft. I endured grueling 14-hour shifts, burns on my arms, and the high-stress environment of a competitive industry. I eventually became a sous chef at a well-regarded restaurant, a position I had earned through sheer grit and talent. Yet, in my parents' eyes, I was still the black sheep, the daughter who had stubbornly chosen a blue-collar life. They introduced us to their friends with a telling disparity. "This is our son, David, the vice president at Sterling Corp," they'd say, beaming with pride. Then they would turn to me, their smiles tightening. "And this is our daughter, Lily. She cooks." The irony was that while they looked down on my profession, they had no problem accepting its financial fruits. There were constant loans they never intended to repay. "Lily, the property taxes are higher than we expected this year. Could you help us out?" my mother would ask. A month later, I'd see photos of her new designer handbag on social media. "Your mother's car needs a new transmission," my father would tell me gravely. "It's a major expense." The next week, he'd be showing off a new set of expensive golf clubs. I became their secret, shame-filled ATM. I gave them the money because, deep down, a part of me was still that little girl desperate for their approval, hoping that maybe this time my contribution would finally make them proud. It never did. It was just another service I provided. I tried to keep a delicate, painful balance, attending family functions, smiling through their backhanded compliments, and celebrating my brother's endless parade of achievements. I thought I could handle it. I thought I knew the rules of the game. I had no idea that my brother's latest promotion was about to shatter that fragile peace completely. The storm arrived in the form of a cream-colored, linen-embossed envelope. It was early November, and the first chill of winter was starting to settle over the city. I had just gotten home after a particularly grueling Saturday night service, my body aching and my clothes smelling of garlic and smoke. The envelope was sitting on my small entryway table, my name written in my mother's perfect, looping cursive. It felt less like a piece of mail and more like a summons. Inside was an invitation, printed on cardstock so thick it could have stopped a bullet. It announced a private dinner party to celebrate David's promotion to senior vice president. My parents were pulling out all the stops. And then I saw the name of the venue, and my breath caught in my throat. Aria. Aria wasn't just a restaurant. It was an institution. It was the crown jewel of the city's culinary scene, a 3-Michelin-star temple of gastronomy run by the legendary chef Antoine Dubois. Getting a reservation there was nearly impossible. Securing their private dining room, the Solstice Room, was a feat reserved for the city's elite. For my parents, this wasn't just a celebration. It was a statement. It was the ultimate performance of their success, a way to showcase their golden son in the most opulent setting imaginable. My initial reaction was a complicated cocktail of emotions. A part of me, the chef part, was thrilled. I had revered Chef Dubois since I first picked up a whisk. I had studied his cookbooks, watched his interviews, and dreamed of one day eating his food. But the daughter part of me felt a familiar, sinking dread. This wasn't about the food. This was about status. And in the world of my parents' making, my status was somewhere down in the basement. An event this grand, this focused on image, could only mean that my role as the family footnote would be magnified under the brightest, most unforgiving lights. The phone call came the next morning, as I knew it would. "Did you get the invitation?" my mother asked, her voice buzzing with an excitement she never displayed for anything related to my life. "I did, Mom. It looks incredible. Aria is amazing. Congratulations to David." "It's the only place fitting for an occasion like this," she said, a hint of smugness in her tone. "We need everything to be perfect. David will be bringing 2 of his senior partners from the firm, so it's a very important night for him. For us." The subtext was clear. Don't do anything to mess this up. For the next 2 weeks, the dinner became the singular focus of my family's universe. My mother called me almost daily with updates and instructions. She wanted to know what I was planning to wear, offering unsolicited and insulting advice. "You'll need something elegant, Lily. Not your usual, artistic look. Maybe I can find one of my old cocktail dresses for you. We need to present a united, successful front." The implication was that my chef's salary couldn't possibly afford something appropriate, and that my personal style was an embarrassment. I held my tongue, burying the hurt under a layer of forced patience. I was genuinely happy for my brother's success, even if the celebration felt designed to exclude me. I told myself that I would go, smile, play my part, and simply try to enjoy the rare opportunity to experience the artistry of a master like Chef Dubois. It was a chance to be a student, a diner, an admirer. For one night, I could set aside the family drama and just appreciate the craft. But as the date drew closer, the signs became more ominous. They were small things, tiny cuts that signaled a deeper wound to come. My parents seemed to be building a narrative for the evening, one in which I played a very specific and very minor role. They were constructing a perfect family portrait for public consumption, and they were carefully airbrushing me out of the picture. I saw the invitation again on my counter and noticed a small, printed line at the bottom I'd overlooked before. Seating is strictly limited. At the time, I dismissed it as standard event formality. I should have recognized it for what it was. A warning. A warning that I was not just a guest. I was an obligation they were struggling to accommodate. In the 2 weeks leading up to the dinner, my family's behavior shifted from subtle condescension to a series of overt acts of exclusion. It felt like they were methodically dismantling any sense of belonging I had left, ensuring I understood my place before the main event. The storm that had been brewing for years was finally gathering force, and each interaction was a flash of lightning, illuminating the ugly truth of our dynamic. The first major incident was the battle of the dress code. My mother, dissatisfied with my assurances that I had something appropriate to wear, took matters into her own hands. She showed up at my small apartment one afternoon, unannounced, holding a garment bag. "I was going through my closet and found this," she said, unzipping the bag to reveal a beige, frumpy dress that was at least a decade out of style. "I think this would be much more suitable for the evening. It's classic." "Thanks, Mom, but I already have a dress," I said, trying to keep my voice even. I had, in fact, spent a significant portion of my savings on a simple but elegant black silk dress, an investment that made me feel both professional and confident. She scanned my apartment, her eyes lingering on my second-hand furniture and worn-out cookbooks. "Lily, dear," she said, her voice softening into that patronizing tone she used when she was about to deliver a blow. "We know you work hard, but a place like Aria has standards. It's not about being trendy. It's about looking like you belong. This dress," she gestured to my purchase hanging on my closet door, "is a little severe, a little plain. My dress will help you blend in more." Blend in. That's what she wanted. For me to be invisible, a beige blur in the background of David's vibrant success. The argument that followed was quiet but brutal. I insisted on wearing my own dress. She accused me of being difficult and ungrateful. "I'm just trying to help you, Lily. Why must you always resist? Why can't you just accept that I might know what's best?" It ended with her leaving the frumpy dress on my couch, a silent monument to her disapproval. The second incident was the +1 snub. I had been dating Mark, a wonderful and supportive fellow chef, for over a year. He was my rock, the one person who understood the pressures of my job and celebrated my successes without reservation. It was natural that I would want him there. When I called my father to ask if I could bring Mark, his response was swift and cold. "Absolutely not," he said. "This is a very exclusive event for immediate family and David's most important business contacts. We've paid per head, and the list is final. There is no room." I was disappointed, but I accepted it. Immediate family seemed like a reasonable boundary. That is, until I overheard a phone conversation between my mother and my aunt a few days later. "Oh, yes, David is bringing his new girlfriend, Tiffany," my mother chirped. "They've only been seeing each other for a month. But she's lovely. Her father is a partner at a big law firm. A perfect match." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Mark, my partner of over a year, was not immediate family. But David's girlfriend of 4 weeks, who happened to have the right social credentials, was welcomed with open arms. The message was crystal clear. Belonging wasn't about love or commitment. It was about status. And Mark, a talented but not yet famous chef, didn't make the cut. The final and most galling event was the demand for a gift. My father called me a week before the dinner. "Lily," he began in his serious, lawyerly tone, "we need to discuss a gift for your brother. Your mother and I are getting him a new Rolex, a proper watch for a senior VP. We thought the children could go in together on something significant as well." "The children?" I repeated, confused. "It's just me and David." Exactly, he said, missing my point entirely. I saw a beautiful set of leather-bound first editions he'd admire. They're only a few $1,000s. If you contribute your share, it would be a wonderful gesture of support. Dad, a few $1,000s is more than my rent. I can't afford that. His voice turned icy. This isn't about what you can afford, Lily. It's about showing respect. It's about family contribution. David's success benefits all of us. It raises the family's profile. The least you can do is make an appropriate gesture. He was asking me, the daughter whose career he openly scorned, to go into debt to buy a lavish gift for the son who needed it least. He wasn't asking, he was levying a tax, a fee I had to pay for the privilege of being related to their success. I felt a wave of nausea. I ended the call by saying I would find something on my own, and he hung up in disgust. After that final phone call, I felt completely depleted. I tried to talk to my mother one last time, hoping for a sliver of understanding. I found her at her real estate office, surrounded by glossy photos of multi-million-dollar homes. I explained how the series of events, the dress, the +1, the gift had made me feel excluded and devalued. She listened with a tight, impatient smile. When I finished, she patted my hand. "Oh, Lily, you're being so oversensitive," she said. The words a familiar refrain from my childhood. "Your father and I are under a tremendous amount of stress planning this event. We need it to be perfect for your brother. Can't you see that? Why must you always make everything about you? For once, can't you just be happy for him?" There it was. The final checkmate. My feelings weren't valid. My perspective didn't matter. I was just a difficult, jealous child in her eyes. A problem to be managed, not a daughter to be understood. That evening, I met my best friend, Sarah, for a much-needed drink. I recounted the whole miserable saga, my voice cracking with a frustration I couldn't hold back anymore. Sarah, who had known me since kindergarten and had witnessed my family dynamic for years, listened intently, her expression growing darker with every word. "Lily," she said, placing her hand over mine, "this isn't just them being thoughtless. This is deliberate. It's like they're trying to systematically erase you from the picture. They're not just celebrating David. They're actively trying to diminish you in the process. It's not just unfair. It's cruel." Hearing her say it aloud, so plainly, was like a key turning in a lock. It validated every hurt, every doubt I'd been feeling. It wasn't me being oversensitive. It was them being unkind. The situation was as toxic as I feared. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the night to come. Walking into that restaurant, I felt a knot of dread in my stomach. I knew the night would be difficult, but I could never have prepared for the sheer, calculated humiliation they had planned. The night of the dinner arrived with a cold, biting wind that seemed to mirror the chill in my soul. I stood in front of my full-length mirror, smoothing down the lines of my black silk dress. It was simple, elegant, and it was me. For a moment, I felt a flicker of confidence, but it was quickly extinguished by the wave of anxiety that washed over me as I thought about the evening ahead. I was walking into the Lion's Den, and I was the only one on the menu. When I arrived at Aria, the entrance was even more imposing than I had imagined. A valet in a crisp uniform took my beat-up sedan with a barely concealed smirk, parking it between a brand-new Porsche and a vintage Mercedes. I walked through the heavy oak doors into a lobby that whispered of old money and understated luxury. The hostess, a tall, elegant woman with a warm smile, greeted me. "Good evening. Welcome to Aria. Do you have a reservation?" "I'm here for the Harrison party," I said, my voice sounding small in the cavernous space. "Of course," she said, her eyes scanning the list. "The Solstice Room. Right this way." She led me down a softly lit hallway, past the main dining room buzzing with quiet conversation and the clinking of silverware. The Solstice Room was at the very back, a private sanctuary with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a beautifully manicured garden. As the hostess opened the door, I saw my family was already there, gathered around a magnificent, long table. My parents, my brother David and his girlfriend Tiffany, my paternal grandparents, and two older, distinguished-looking men who must have been David's colleagues. They were all laughing, champagne flutes in hand, bathed in the warm glow of a crystal chandelier. They looked like a magazine ad for the perfect, powerful family. And then, as I stepped inside, the laughter faltered. All eyes turned to me. "Lily! You're here," my mother said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She glanced at my dress, a flicker of disapproval in her expression. But she said nothing. My father stood up. "Excellent. Now that everyone's arrived, we can begin." I looked at the table. It was exquisitely set with fine china, polished silver, and an array of sparkling glasses. A beautiful floral arrangement ran down the center. But as my eyes moved along the place settings, a cold, hard knot formed in the pit of my stomach. I counted them. 1, 2, 3, 9, 10. There were 10 chairs and 10 place settings. My parents, my grandparents, David and Tiffany, the 2 colleagues, and 2 empty chairs. No, wait. One of the men had his briefcase on the chair next to him. That left 1 empty seat. But that couldn't be right. Counting myself, we were 9 people. I looked again. My parents, grandparents, David, Tiffany, 2 colleagues, me. That was 9. The table was set for 10 people, but there were only 9 of us in the room. Who was the 10th person? My father cleared his throat, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. He walked over to me and placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Lily," he began, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "There seems to have been a slight mix-up with the reservation. A communication error. We booked for 10, but there was only space confirmed for 8 at the table initially." I stared at him, confused. "But there are chairs here." "Yes," he continued, his smile widening. "We managed to squeeze in a 9th seat for your grandmother. But unfortunately, that still leaves us 1 short. Don't you worry, though. We've come up with a solution." He gestured towards the glass doors that led to the outdoor terrace. It was a beautiful stone patio, but it was empty, dark, and exposed to the biting November wind. "The staff has been kind enough to set up a small table for you out there. You'll have a lovely view of the gardens. A bit of fresh air." The room went silent. The 2 colleagues shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My grandmother looked horrified. David just stared down at his phone, a faint smile on his face. Tiffany looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. They were kicking me out. It wasn't a mix-up. It was a message, delivered with surgical precision in front of an audience. They had intentionally created a scenario where I was literally cast out of the family circle. They were seating me outside, in the cold, alone, at a restaurant where I could never afford to eat, during a celebration of the success they believed I would never achieve. It was the ultimate, most public humiliation they could conceive. It was a declaration that I did not belong. For a long moment, I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Every past slight, every condescending comment, every missed graduation and feigned smile coalesced into this single brutal act. This was not just unkindness. This was cruelty. This was them, in a room full of crystal and power, telling me that my very presence was an inconvenience, a stain on their perfect picture. In that frozen moment, something inside me broke. It was the part of me that had spent a lifetime craving their approval, the part that made excuses for their behavior, the part that believed, against all evidence, that if I just tried a little harder, worked a little more, gave a little more, they would finally see me. And through the cracks of that broken part, something new and hard and clear began to rise. It was anger, yes, but it was also a profound, liberating clarity. I finally saw them for who they were. Small, insecure people who needed to diminish me to feel powerful. As I stood there, reeling from the shock, the hostess who had led me in reappeared at the doorway, her face a mask of professional neutrality, though I could see the sympathy in her eyes. My father, misinterpreting my silence as acquiescence, gestured for her to escort me outside. "The young lady will be dining on the terrace," he announced grandly. But as the hostess took a step towards me, a new voice cut through the tense silence. It was a man's voice, calm and authoritative, with a distinct French accent. That will not be necessary. The voice came from the doorway behind the hostess, and as he stepped into the light, my heart, which I thought had stopped, began to pound with a completely different rhythm. It was a voice I knew better than my own, and suddenly I knew this night was far from over. Everything was about to change. Standing in the doorway was a man in his late 50s, his silvering hair impeccably styled, his eyes sharp and intelligent. He wore the pristine white uniform of a head chef, a uniform that, in this establishment, carried more authority than any bespoke suit in the room. It was Chef Antoine Dubois, my mentor, my friend, my secret weapon. My parents and David stared at him, starstruck. To them, he was a culinary deity, the genius behind the most sought-after reservation in the city. They had no idea of our connection. They didn't know that 8 years ago, when I was just a terrified culinary student competing in a local competition, he had been a guest judge. He had tasted my dish, a simple sea bass with a lemon caper sauce, a recipe my grandmother had taught me, and had seen something in me that even I didn't know was there. He had pulled me aside after the competition, offered me an internship at his first, smaller restaurant, and eventually, when he saw my dedication, had quietly funded a scholarship that allowed me to finish my final year of school without drowning in debt. He was the reason I had a career. He was the father figure my own father had never been. He knew everything. He had listened over countless late-night coffees after my shifts as I vented about my family's disapproval, their condescension, their complete lack of understanding. He knew the years of hurt that had led to this moment. His eyes met mine across the room, and in them, I saw not pity, but a simmering, protective anger. He gave me a nearly imperceptible nod, a silent promise that he had my back. "Chef Dubois," my father stammered, getting to his feet and smoothing down his tie. "This is an honor. We weren't expecting to see you personally." Chef Antoine ignored him completely. His gaze was fixed on me. "Lily," he said, his voice warm but firm. "I apologize. I was in the kitchen and was just informed of this situation. There must be a grave misunderstanding." "No, not at all," my mother chimed in, flustered. "It's just a small booking error. My daughter is perfectly happy to—" "Madame," Chef Antoine interrupted, his voice dropping a few degrees and silencing her instantly. "Lily is one of the most talented young chefs I have ever had the privilege of mentoring. She is not just some guest you can shunt off to the terrace because you miscounted. Her palate is more sophisticated than anyone's in this room, myself included on most days." My father's jaw went slack. David looked as if he'd been slapped. They were trying to process the impossible. The world-famous chef they idolized was not only defending me but praising me with an intimacy that suggested a deep, personal connection. Chef Antoine walked over to me and discreetly placed a hand on my back, a gesture of solidarity. He leaned in and whispered, so only I could hear, "This ends tonight. Play along with me. We will give them a dinner they will never forget." A surge of adrenaline shot through me, washing away the last remnants of fear and humiliation. This wasn't my shame anymore. It was theirs. I straightened my shoulders and looked my father in the eye. "It's all right, Chef," I said, my voice clear and steady. "My father is right. A solution has been found. I will take the table on the terrace." My parents exchanged a look of triumphant relief. They thought I was surrendering, backing down in the face of their authority. Chef Antoine's face remained impassive, but I could feel the slight pressure from his hand, urging me to trust him. "Very well," he said aloud, turning back to my parents. "If that is your wish, allow me to escort my dear friend to her table personally." He guided me out of the solstice room, leaving my family in a state of confused, smug victory. The moment the door closed behind us, his professional demeanor dissolved. "Are you all right, ma chérie?" he asked, his eyes filled with genuine concern. "I am now," I said, a shaky but real smile finally reaching my lips. "What's the plan?" His eyes twinkled with a mischievous glint I knew well. "The plan," he said, "is that we will give you a dinner so spectacular, so exclusive, that it will make their little party in there look like a children's tea party. And we will do it in a way that ensures they know exactly what they have done." He led me not to the cold, empty terrace, but through a different door, one marked staff only, and into the gleaming, chaotic, beautiful heart of the restaurant, the kitchen. The familiar sounds of sizzling pans, clattering plates, and shouted orders washed over me like a homecoming. Several of the line cooks, some of whom I had trained with during my internship, looked up and broke into smiles when they saw me. "Lily's here!" one of them called out. "Ignore them," Antoine commanded his brigade, though he was smiling. "Tonight, Lily is not a chef. She is our most honored guest. I want you to clear my table." He was pointing to the chef's table, a small, intimate table set in a quiet alcove of the kitchen itself. It was the most exclusive seat in the entire city, reserved for visiting dignitaries, celebrity chefs, and Antoine's closest friends. It offered a front-row seat to the theater of a 3-Michelin-star kitchen. It was a place my parents couldn't have bought a seat at for any price. "The plan is simple," Antoine explained as a sommelier appeared with a bottle of vintage champagne. "You will dine here. I will personally oversee every course. We will send a message to your family's room with each dish, explaining that Miss Lily is currently enjoying the seared foie gras with fig reduction, or Miss Lily is sampling the white truffle risotto. We will torture them with civility." A wild, exhilarating laugh escaped my lips. It was brilliant. It was theatrical. It was perfect. It was a plan born of a chef's mind, using food as both a weapon and a shield. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding not with fear, but with a thrilling, terrifying sense of anticipation. I looked at Antoine, my eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you," I whispered. "Nonsense," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "Family protects its own. And you, Lily, are family." I walked back towards the doors of the main dining room, champagne flute in hand, ready to make my exit from the terrace official. My parents thought they had banished me. They had no idea they had just set me free, right into the heart of my own kingdom. The game was about to be played on my field, by my rules. I pushed open the heavy oak door to the solstice room and stepped back inside. The atmosphere was a strange mix of relief and lingering tension. My family had visibly relaxed, believing they had successfully handled the Lily problem. My father was pontificating to David's colleagues. My mother was showing Tiffany photos on her phone, and David was leaning back in his chair with the smug air of a king holding court. They all looked up as I entered, surprise registering on their faces. They had expected me to be shivering on the terrace, not striding back in with a glass of what was clearly very expensive champagne in my hand. "Lily, what are you doing?" my mother asked, a hint of annoyance in her voice. "We're about to order. I just came to let you know that I won't be dining on the terrace after all," I said calmly. My voice didn't shake. It was as clear and steady as a bell. "There's been a change of plans." My father scowled. "What kind of change of plans? We had an arrangement. Don't make a scene." "Oh, I'm not the one who will be making a scene," I assured him. At that exact moment, Chef Antoine Dubois appeared in the doorway behind me. This time, he wasn't alone. He was flanked by the restaurant's general manager and the head sommelier. It was a culinary power trio, and their expressions were gravely serious. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrison," Chef Antoine began, his voice echoing slightly in the suddenly silent room. "I must apologize again for the confusion tonight. I have spoken with my staff, and I have spoken with Lily, and I'm afraid I cannot, in good conscience, allow one of my most esteemed colleagues to be treated with such disregard in my establishment." My father's face began to turn a deep shade of crimson. "Now, see here," he blustered. "This is a private family matter. Your colleague is my daughter." "Indeed," Antoine cut him off smoothly. "A daughter who, 8 years ago, won the Dubois Foundation Grant for Culinary Excellence, an award we give to only one promising student in the country each year. A daughter who interned in my kitchen for a year and consistently outperformed chefs with twice her experience. A daughter who I believe will be one of the great culinary voices of her generation." He let that sink in. The colleague's eyebrows shot up. My grandparents looked from me to my parents with dawning comprehension. David's smug smile had vanished, replaced by a look of utter disbelief. Antoine continued, his voice resonating with authority. "As it happens, the chef's table in my kitchen is available this evening. It is a place I reserve for my most treasured guests, for true connoisseurs of the craft. And tonight, I have insisted that Lily dine there as my personal guest of honor. He turned to me with a warm smile. Lily, your table is ready. Then he looked back at my family, his expression turning to ice. Of course, you are all welcome to remain here and enjoy your dinner. The tasting menu is adequate. The word adequate hung in the air, a perfectly delivered insult. He had, with a single word, dismissed their entire performance of wealth and status. He had designated their grand celebration, the pinnacle of their social climbing, as merely sufficient. The humiliation on my parents' faces was a sight to behold. It was a profound, public unmasking. In front of the very people they were trying to impress David's powerful colleagues, their carefully constructed facade had been shattered by the one person whose authority in this building was absolute. They had tried to use the restaurant as a weapon against me, and its master had just turned that weapon back on them. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. My father looked like he was choking on his pride. David was staring at me as if he was seeing me for the first time, not as his annoying little sister, but as someone with a secret life and a secret power he knew nothing about. I took a final sip of my champagne. Well, I said, addressing the room at large, I wouldn't want to be late. I placed the empty glass on their table with a soft click. Enjoy your dinner, I said, my gaze sweeping over my parents and brother. I'm sure it will be memorable. I turned and walked out of the room, with Chef Antoine holding the door open for me. I didn't look back. I could feel their stunned, impotent rage following me down the hall. I could imagine the frantic, whispered conversation that was about to erupt, the desperate attempts to salvage their image in front of their guests. As the kitchen doors swung shut behind me, enveloping me in the warmth, noise, and energy of my true world, I felt a decade of weight lift from my shoulders. The need for their approval, the hurt of their rejection, the exhaustion of trying to be someone I wasn't, it all evaporated in the heat of the kitchen. I hadn't just won an argument, I had reclaimed my own story. But as I sat down at the chef's table and watched the ballet of the kitchen begin, I knew the real fallout, the true confrontation, was yet to come. The dinner that followed was one of the most magical experiences of my life. Sitting at the chef's table, I wasn't just a diner. I was a part of the orchestra. Chef Antoine didn't just serve me food. He told me stories with it. Each course was a masterpiece, a conversation between ingredients. He would come to the table himself to present each dish, explaining its origin and inspiration, his eyes twinkling as he watched me take the first bite. The rest of the kitchen staff treated me like visiting royalty, stopping by to share a quick word or a laugh. For the first time in years, I felt seen. I felt respected. I felt home. Throughout the meal, a waiter would periodically leave my table to deliver a small covered dish to the solstice room. A complimentary amuse-bouche from the chef's table, Antoine had instructed him to say. A palate cleanser for Miss Lily's next course. Each delivery was a small, perfectly executed act of psychological warfare, a reminder of the experience they were being denied. My phone, which I had placed face down on the table, buzzed incessantly. A torrent of texts from my mother, my father, and David. From Mom. Lily, what is the meaning of this? You have embarrassed us in front of everyone. From Dad. You need to come back to this room immediately and apologize. This is insubordination. From David. Who the hell do you think you are? You ruined my night. I read them, and for the first time, their words had no power over me. They felt like messages from a distant country where I no longer lived. I simply silenced my phone and savored my dessert, a delicate sphere of white chocolate that cracked open to reveal a passion fruit mousse. When the meal was over, Chef Antoine walked me to the front entrance. You will not take your old car, he said firmly. My driver will take you home. He embraced me warmly. You have a gift, Lily. Never let anyone, especially them, make you feel small for sharing it with the world. I spent that night at my friend Sarah's apartment, unwilling to face the toxic environment that awaited me at the small guest cottage on my parents' property where I had been living to save money. We stayed up late, and I recounted every detail of the evening. We laughed until we cried. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated freedom. The next morning, I made a decision. I was done. Done living in their shadow, done being their financial safety net, done accepting their emotional scraps. I spent the day on the phone with apartment brokers. By evening, I had found a small but sunny one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood I loved, close to my own restaurant. I signed the lease the following day, using the emergency fund I had painstakingly built, the one my parents knew nothing about. 2 days after the dinner, I went back to the guest cottage to pack my things. My parents were waiting for me, their faces a mixture of fury and confusion. "How could you do that to us?" my mother demanded the moment I walked in. "Humiliating us, siding with a stranger against your own family." "He's not a stranger, Mom. He's my mentor. And he showed me more kindness in one evening than you two have shown me in the last decade," I replied, my voice devoid of the anger I expected to feel. I was just tired. "We gave you a place to live. We support you," my father yelled. "No," I said, turning to face him. "You let me live here so you could have easy access to my bank account. And you have never, not once, supported my career. You have belittled it. You have been ashamed of it." I spent the next 2 hours packing my life into boxes, ignoring their threats, their pleas, their attempts at guilt-tripping. As I carried the last box to my car, my brother David pulled into the driveway. He got out of his car and blocked my path. "So that's it?" he sneered. "You throw a tantrum, ruin the most important night of my career, and now you're just leaving?" "Your night was about celebrating a title and a salary, David," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "My night was about reclaiming my self-respect. And yes, I'm leaving. I'm finally getting my own place." He actually laughed. "With what money? You're a cook. You'll be back here in a month when you can't pay your rent." That was the moment I knew I had made the right choice. Their perception of me was so fundamentally warped, so rooted in their own narrative of my failure, that they couldn't conceive of a reality where I could stand on my own. "Goodbye, David," I said, and drove away without looking back. The first few weeks in my new apartment were a revelation. I reveled in the quiet, in the freedom. I bought a small pot of basil and put it on my windowsill. I cooked for myself. Simple, joyful meals, without any judgment. I had my freedom, but I knew they still had my phone number. The constant barrage of calls and texts that followed showed me they hadn't learned a single thing. Their messages were a blend of anger and wounded pride. I realized that to truly be free, I needed to establish a much harder, more permanent boundary. A year can change everything. 12 months after that fateful dinner at Aria, the landscape of my life and my family's was unrecognizable. The small, sunny apartment I had escaped to became my sanctuary, the place where I rediscovered my own rhythm. But it was only a temporary stop. The story of that night at Aria, as these things often do in the tight-knit restaurant community, got around. It became a piece of local culinary lore, the story of the powerful Chef Dubois publicly championing his protégé against her snobbish family. The publicity, combined with Antoine's unwavering support, opened doors I had only dreamed of. Investors who had previously dismissed me as too young or inexperienced were suddenly eager to hear my business plan. 6 months after leaving my parents' property, with a small business loan co-signed by Chef Antoine himself, I opened Hearth, my very own restaurant. Hearth was the culmination of everything I believed in. It was a small, intimate space with an open kitchen, focused on locally sourced ingredients and the kind of soulful, comforting food my grandmother had taught me to make. Elevated with the techniques I had honed over a decade, it was an instant success. We were booked out weeks in advance. The city's top food critic gave us a glowing review, calling Hearth a revelation of honesty and heart. I was working harder than ever, but for the first time, it was for myself. I was building my own dream, not subsidizing theirs. Mark joined me as my head chef, and together, we created not just a restaurant, but a community. Meanwhile, the Harrison family portrait began to crack. The humiliation from that night had consequences. David's senior partners had not been impressed by his family's display of petty cruelty. They saw it as a lack of judgment, a sign of instability. The whispers started in the hallowed halls of his investment firm. His meteoric rise stalled. He was still a senior VP, But the coveted promotion to managing director that had seemed imminent went to someone else. The golden boy aura had tarnished. His perfect match, Tiffany, whose father was a powerful lawyer, broke up with him a few months later, citing his family's embarrassing lack of class. My parents found themselves in a new, uncomfortable social position. Their primary source of pride in conversation, David's flawless success, was now a sensitive subject. Their attempts to brag about my restaurant were awkward and transparent. They would try to name-drop Chef Antoine, only to have people who knew the real story look at them with thinly veiled contempt. They had built their identity on a foundation of image and status, and when that foundation cracked, they found they had very little else to stand on. They tried, of course, to re-enter my life. The angry texts eventually gave way to manipulative, guilt-laden voicemails. "Lily, your mother is so upset. She just wants her family back together," my father would say. "We miss you." My mother would cry in a message, conveniently forgetting the reason I had left. I didn't ignore them completely. I established new, ironclad boundaries. I would not discuss money with them, ever. I would meet them for a coffee in a public place once a month, but I would not go to their house, and they were not welcome in mine, not yet. The conversations were stilted, strained. They were desperate to regain their old power dynamic, and I was resolute in maintaining the new one. They couldn't comprehend that I no longer needed anything from them, not their money, not their approval, not even their presence. I was thriving not just without them, but because I was without them. The most telling moment came about 10 months after the dinner. My father called me. "Lily," he said, his voice unusually subdued. "Your mother isn't feeling well. She has to have a minor surgery and she's very nervous. She was hoping you might cook her something comforting like you used to make for your grandmother." A year ago, I would have dropped everything, rushing to their side with soup and sympathy, desperate for this small crumb of validation. But now, I paused. I saw the request for what it was, a test, an attempt to pull me back into my old role as the family caretaker. "I'm sorry to hear she's unwell, Dad," I said, my voice kind but firm. "Hearth is fully booked this week, and I can't leave my staff. I can have a nice vegetable lasagna from the restaurant delivered to the house for her. I hope she feels better soon." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. He had expected me to fold. When I didn't, he didn't know how to react. "Oh," he finally said. "All right then. Thank you." It was a small victory, but perhaps the most significant one. I could be compassionate without being a doormat. I could show care on my own terms. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. I was no longer the daughter begging for a seat at their table. I was the chef who owned the restaurant, and they were the ones hoping for a reservation. Looking back at that night at Aria, I realized it wasn't just about a dinner table. It was the moment I finally stopped asking for their approval and started giving it to myself. And that realization led me to the most important lesson of all. That night at Aria feels like a lifetime ago. A scene from a movie starring someone else. It was a single evening, a few short hours in the grand scheme of things, but it was the earthquake that shifted the entire tectonic plate of my life. For years, I had been living with a quiet, invisible weight on my shoulders. It was the weight of expectation, not the expectation that I would succeed, but the expectation that I would perpetually occupy the space they had designated for me. The background, the footnote, the family's resident failure and convenient resource. I had spent a lifetime holding my breath, walking on eggshells, and performing a constant, exhausting calculus of approval. Would this gesture please them? Would this success be small enough not to threaten them? Would this sacrifice finally earn me a genuine smile? The greatest lesson I learned through all of this wasn't about them. It was about the profound and corrosive nature of seeking validation from people who are committed to misunderstanding you. I finally understood that it is a form of self-betrayal. Every time I accepted their backhanded compliments, every time I loaned them money hoping it would buy a sliver of respect, every time I silenced my own hurt to keep their peace, I was telling myself that their comfort was more important than my dignity. Their perception of me was more real than my own truth. The love they offered was conditional, and I had spent a decade diligently, painfully trying to meet the terms and conditions of a contract I could never fulfill because the fine print stipulated that I must always be less than them. When my father pointed to that lonely table on the cold, dark terrace, it was more than just an insult. It was the physical manifestation of my entire life within my family. I was literally being cast out. In that moment, I heard the sound of something shattering inside me. It wasn't my heart, not entirely. It was the thick, distorted lens through which I had been viewing them and myself for 28 years. The illusion that their love was something I could earn if I was just good enough, quiet enough, or generous enough, exploded into a million pieces. And for the first time, I saw them with perfect, horrifying clarity. I saw their insecurity, their deep-seated need to have someone to look down upon so they could feel tall. My success, however modest, wasn't a source of pride for them. It was a threat to the family hierarchy, a disruption to the narrative where David was the sun and I was a distant, forgotten planet. And that's when I learned the crucial difference between family and relatives. Relatives are a biological fact, a map of DNA you can't change. But family is a choice. It's an action. It's the daily, conscious decision to show up for someone, to listen to them, to protect them, and to celebrate them, not in spite of who they are, but because of it. My parents and brother are my relatives. But Chef Antoine, who saw a spark in a terrified culinary student and nurtured it without asking for anything in return. My friend Sarah, who listened to my pain and validated my reality when my own mother called me oversensitive. My partner Mark, who celebrated my smallest victories as if they were his own. They are my family. They are the people who pull up a chair, who make space, who believe that your success is their joy, not their competition. My relationship with my biological relatives is now an exercise in boundary management. It's distant, but it's more honest than it has ever been, because it is no longer built on my silent compliance. We have those once-a-month coffee meetings in the neutral territory of a downtown cafe. The conversations are a carefully choreographed dance around the truth. They ask about Hearth, their voices tinged with a grudging respect that only came after a major newspaper review. They can comprehend success when it's validated by an external authority, but they still can't comprehend the passion and the grit that built it. They see the restaurant, but they still don't see me. And I've finally learned that's okay. I've stopped trying to be seen by the willfully blind. The ultimate irony, the perfect, poetic bookend to this whole saga, came a few months ago. My mother called, her voice sweet with a strategic nonchalance I could now recognize from a mile away. It was their anniversary, and they wanted to celebrate somewhere truly special. They had, of course, tried to book a table at Aria, and had been politely but firmly informed that there was no availability for them. Not now, not ever. Chef Antoine, with a quiet loyalty that still brings tears to my eyes, has permanently blacklisted their name from the booking system. Lily, darling, my mother had said into the phone, I was wondering if you could possibly speak to your friend, Chef Dubois. Perhaps pull a few strings for your father and me. I remember sitting in my small office at Hearth, the sounds of my own bustling, happy kitchen humming in the background. I looked at the wall where I had framed my grandmother's handwritten recipe for sea bass, the dish that had started it all. A year ago, that request would have torn me apart. A loyalty test designed to make me fail no matter what I chose. But now, it was simple. There was no conflict, only clarity. I'm so sorry, Mom, I said, and the apology was genuine. I was sorry for her, sorry that she still didn't understand. I can't do that. As I understand it, the chef's table is reserved for family. The silence that followed was more satisfying than any argument I could have won. In that moment, the power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been permanently redrawn. I was no longer the daughter begging for a seat at their table. I was the chef who understood its value, and they were the ones left outside, looking in. The most important thing I've learned is that you cannot control how others see you, but you have absolute control over whether you choose to live inside their narrow definition of you. The world will always have people who need you to be small so they can feel big. They will ask you to dim your light so their own mediocrity isn't so glaringly obvious. For the longest time, I thought that was my role, to make myself smaller, quieter, less ambitious, to keep the peace. But peace at the cost of your own soul isn't peace at all. It's a prison. That night, Chef Antoine didn't just give me a seat at his table. He reminded me that I had the right to build my own. And that's what I did. Hearth isn't just a restaurant. It's a table I built with my own two hands. A place where everyone is welcome, where passion is the main ingredient, and where no one is ever asked to eat alone outside. So I want to leave you with this question, a question I've had to ask myself. What was your Aria moment? What was that one crystallizing moment when the illusion shattered and you saw a person or a situation for exactly what it was? The moment you realized that your peace was more valuable than their approval. Share your stories in the comments below. Your experiences matter, and they remind us all that we are not alone in these struggles. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you feel seen, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more stories about finding your own strength, and share this video with someone who might need a reminder that their worth is not, and never has been, up for debate. Remember, you always deserve a seat at the table, and if they won't give you one, go out and build your own. You might be surprised at how many wonderful people have been waiting their whole lives to dine with you. Thank you for listening.